Hello everybody, this is Refresh, and I am here to bring you a battle between the 5 Ravnica Allegiance guild kits. We'll be playing free-for-all, and we have each deck represented by their specific sleeves. We'll roll to see who goes first. Gruul rolls 4, Azorius rolls 7, Simic rolls 7, Orzhov rolls 3, Rakdos rolls 9. Rakdos will go first. We'll draw 7 cards each. Rakdos draws a Mountain, Thrill Kill Assassin, Mountain, Avatar of Discord, Splatter Thug, Rakdos Carnarium, and Augur Scree. This is not a good hand because the Carnarium gives us our black mana, but we can't actually cast anything till a later turn. So we're gonna mulligan this. Second hand has a Mountain, Rakdos Lord of Riots, Swamp, Riot Spikes, Rakdos Carnarium, Swamp, and Udvara Hellkite. This is all payoffs and nothing early. Even though the mana is good, because there's no certainty that we're going to be able to draw into anything good, we will mulligan again. Now we draw a Rakdos Carnarium, Carnival Hellseed, Mountain, Blade Juggler, Crypt Champion, Rakdos Guildmage, and Master of Cruelties. We have 2 mana. This is still a bad hand, so we are going to mulligan yet again and go to 5. Now we have a Dreadbore, Rakdos Carnarium, Rakdos Pit Dragon, Rakdos Signet, Blade Juggler, and Swamp. Well, I don't think we can go any lower than this. So this is a bad hand, but we have to keep it at 5. So we'll take the Dreadbore and the Rakdos Carnarium and stick them at the bottom. And we'll end up in a shape that's just as bad as our starting hand, possibly worse. Gruul draws a Burning Tree Emissary, Mountain, Wasteland Viper, Zertog Goblin, Gruul Charm, Mountain, and Gruul Turf. This does not have the right mix of lands and castables, and so we're going to mulligan. Now we have a Gruul Turf, Gruul Guildgate Forest, Wasteland Viper Forest, Flames of the Razeboar, and Gruul Turf. This is pretty much all lands, but I think we have to keep it because it's hard to deny that the land situation is kind of tough. Azorius draws a Spirit of the Spires, Summary Judgment, Azorius Chancery, Sphinx of Nukrov, Azorius Kirun, Azorius Charm, and Plains. This is not a good hand. That Chancery and the Plains do not work well together. We're going to return this. Now we have an Azorius Kirun, Sphinx's Insight, Azorius Guildmage, Judge's Familiar, Sky Hussar, Island, and Spirit of the Spires. 1 land is a no-go. We'll return this and go to 6. Now we have a Plains, Summary Judgment, Dramatic Rescue, Island, Espiri the Inscrutable, Depose, Deploy, and Island. This is a keepable hand, so we will do so. We'll put Dramatic Rescue to the bottom. Simic draws a Simic Guildgate, Zanuck Guildmage, Simic Growth Chamber, Cloudfin Raptor, Simic Growth Chamber, Island, and Island. This is not an ideal hand, but I think we have to keep it because we have lands and things that we can play, and the Growth Chambers are kind of oppressive. Orzhov draws an Orzhov Signet, Vizkopa Guildmage, Swamp, Vindictive Vampire, Ghost Council Orzhova, Plains, and Pillory of the Sleepless. I don't really want to keep this hand, but I think that the Signet lets us do so. Turn 1, because this is multiplayer, each deck will draw. Rakdos draws a Rakdos Cackler. We'll play the Swamp. We'll tap the Swamp and we'll play the Rakdos Cackler. This is a 1/1 Devil with Unleash, and we will choose to unleash it, making it a 2/2. Gruul draws, gets a Rhythm of the Wild. Gruul will play a Forest. We'll tap the Forest and we'll play the Wasteland Viper. This is a 1/2 snake with Death Touch and Blood Rush, but the Blood Rush will not matter. Azorius draws, gets a Judge's Familiar. We'll play an Island. We'll tap the Island. We'll play the Judge's Familiar. This is a 1/1 bird with flying, and we can sacrifice it to counter target instant or sorcery spell unless its controller pays 1. Simic draws, gets a Nimbus Swimmer. We'll play an Island. We'll tap the Island and we'll play the Cloudfin Raptor. This is a 0/1 bird mutant with flying and evolve. Orzhov draws a Martyred Rusalka. We'll play the plains. We'll tap the plains to play the Martyred Rusalka. This is a 1/1 spirit, and you can pay white to sacrifice a creature. Target creature can't attack this turn. Rakdos untaps. Rakdos draws. Gets a Carnival Carnage. Then Rakdos will tap the black mana. Will cast Carnival, which says Carnival deals 1 damage to target creature or planeswalker and 1 damage to that permanent's controller. And we will target Simic's Bird Mutant. The Cloudfin Raptor dies, and Simic will take 1 to go down to 19. Then the Cackler will attack Simic for 2. Simic can't block, they'll take 2 and go to 17. Then Rakdos will play the Carnarium. It'll enter the battlefield tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, we have to return a land to our hand. We'll return the swamp to our hand, and then you can tap it to add black and red. And Rakdos will pass the turn. Gruul untaps. Gruul draws. Gets a Thunder Shaman. Gruul will play the Guildgate. It enters the battlefield tapped. And then Gruul will hold. Azorius untaps. Azorius draws. Gets a Lavinia of the 10th. Then Azorius will play a Plains. And Azorius will attack Rakdos with the Judge's Familiar. Rakdos takes 1 and goes to 19. And then Azorius will pass the turn. Simic untaps. Simic draws. Gets a Forest. We'll play the Forest. We'll tap the Forest and the Island. And we'll play the Zamek Guildmage. This is a 2/2 Elf Wizard, and for green-blue this turn, each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. And for green-blue, you can remove a +1/+1 counter from a creature you control to draw a card. Simic will pass. Orzhov untaps. Orzhov draws. Gets a Keening Banshee. And then we will play the Swamp. We'll tap both the plains and the Swamp and play an Orzhov Signet. This is an artifact. It says 1 tap, add white, black, and then Orzhov will pass the turn. Rakdos untaps. Rakdos draws, gets an Avatar of Discord. Then we'll attack Azorius with the Rakdos Cackler. Azorius will take the damage and go to 18. And then we will play the Swamp. We will tap the Carnarium and the Swamp to play the Blade Juggler with Spectacle. This is a 3/2 human rogue with Spectacle for 2 and a black, and when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card. We'll take a damage to go to 18 and we'll draw a card. This is a Rixmati Reveler, and then Rakdos will pass the turn. Gruul untaps. Gruul draws. Gets a Skargan Firebird. Gruul will play a Forest. We'll tap everything and we'll play the Rhythm of the Wild. This is an enchantment. It says creature spells you control can't be countered. Non-token creatures you control have Riot. And then we're going to pass the turn. Azorius untaps. Azorius draws. Gets an island. We'll play the island. And then we'll pass the turn. Simic untaps. Simic draws. Gets a Coiling Oracle. We will play the Simic Guildgate and enters the battlefield tapped. Then we'll tap the Forest and the Island, and we will cast the Coiling Oracle. This is a 1/1 Snake Elf Druid, and when it enters the battlefield, reveal the top card of your library. It's a Frilled Mystic. If it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield, otherwise put it into your hand. We'll go ahead and put this into our hand. Everybody knows about it, unfortunately, but that's life sometimes. And then we'll pass the turn. Orzhov untaps. Orzhov draws, gets a Pontiff of Blight. Orzhov is feeling the mana be screwed. We'll go ahead and tap the Swamp to tap the Orzhov Signet to play the Vizkopa Guildmage. This is a 2/2 human wizard, and for 1 white black, target creature gains lifelink until end of turn, and for 1 white black, whenever you gain life this turn, each opponent loses that much life. We'll pass the turn. Rakdos untaps. Rakdos draws. Gets a Rakdos Signet. Will attack Azorius with both the Blade Juggler and the Rakdos Cackler. Azorius will spend a Plains and an Island and cast Summary Judgment, targeting the Blade Juggler. This is an instant. It says Summary Judgment deals 3 damage to target tapped creature. Has addendum, but it won't matter. Blade Juggler dies. Azorius still takes 2 and goes to 16. Then Rakdos will tap 2 and play the Rakdos Signet. This is an artifact. You can pay 1, tap, add black and red. Then we'll pay 1, tap the Rakdos Signet to play another Rakdos Signet, and then Rakdos will pass the turn. Gruul untaps. Gruul draws, gets a Cinder Vines. Gruul will spend 2 mana and play the Cinder Vines. This is an enchantment. It says whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, Cinder Vines deals 1 damage to that player, and we can also pay 1 to sacrifice it to destroy target artifact or enchantment, and Cinder Vine deals 2 damage to that permanent's controller. Then we'll play the Gruul Turf. It'll enter the battlefield tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, we'll have to put a land back in our hand. We'll put the forest back in our hand, and then you can tap it for red and green. Then Gruul will pass the turn. Azorius untaps. Azorius draws, gets an island. We'll play the island, and Azorius will pass the turn. Simic untaps. Simic draws, gets a Gyre Sage. Simic will tap the forest and the island. We'll play the Gyre Sage. This is a 1/2 Elf Druid with Evolve, and you can tap to add green for each +1/+1 counter on Gyre Sage. Then we will play the Simic Growth Chamber. We'll bounce back the forest into our hand because it's one of those lands. And then we will attack Azorius with the Coiling Oracle. Azorius will take 1 and go to 15. Then Simic will pass the turn. Orzhov will untap. Orzhov will draw. We get an Orzhov Basilica. Orzhov will play the Basilica. It enters the battlefield tapped. We'll bounce the swamp back into our hand, and Orzhov will pass the turn. Rakdos untaps. Rakdos draws. We get a Rakdos Charm. And then we are going to tap the Carnarium to tap both of the signets. We have 4 mana. We'll play the Rakdos Pit Dragon. This is a 3/3 dragon. And for red, it gains flying until end of turn. For red, you can give it +1/+0 until end of turn. And Rakdos Pit Dragon has double strike as long as you have no cards in your hand. Then we will attack Azorius with the Rakdos Cackler. In response, Azorius will tap out, and they'll play Deploy. This is an instant. It says create 2/1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying, and then you gain 1 life for each creature you control. We get our 2 Thopters. We'll gain 3 life between all the Thopters and the Judge's Familiar to go back up to 18. And then we will double block with the 2 Thopters to trade for the Cackler. Thopters die. The Cackler dies. And Rakdos passes the turn. Gruul untaps. Gruul draws. They get a forest. They will play the forest. Then they will tap the turf and the Gruul Guildgate for red. We'll tap another forest. We'll play the Thunder Shaman. This is a 5/5 giant shaman, and it can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. When it deals combat damage to a player, destroy target artifact or enchantment that player controls. We will use Riot, and we will give the Shaman haste. Oh, we forgot. Cinder Vines would have dealt 1 damage to Azorius, so Azorius will go down to 17. And then we will attack Rakdos with the Thunder Shaman. Rakdos declines the block, will go to 13, and then the Thunder Shaman will blow up one of the signets. And then Gruul will pass the turn. Azorius untaps. Azorius draws, gets a Plains, we'll play the Plains. And then we'll attack Gruul with the Judge's Familiar. Gruul takes 1 and goes to 19. And then we will spend 5 mana and we'll cast Isperia the Inscrutable. She is a 3/6 legendary Sphinx with flying, and when she deals combat damage to a player, choose a card name. That player reveals their hand. If a card with chosen name is revealed this way, search your library for a creature card with flying, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. And then Azorius will pass. Simic untaps. Simic draws, gets a Galloping Lizrog. And then Simic will play a forest. And Simic will pass the turn with mana held up for the Frilled Mystic. Orzhov untaps. Orzhov draws, gets a Plains. Orzhov will play the swamp. Orzhov will tap the plains to tap the signet, to tap the basilica, and will play Ghost Council of Orzhova. This is a 4/4 legendary spirit. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. We will target Gruul, will gain a life to go to 21. Gruul goes to 18. For 1, you can sacrifice a creature, exile Ghost Council of Orzhova. It returns to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next step. And then Orzhov will pass the turn. Rakdos untaps. Rakdos draws. Gets a swamp. We'll play the swamp. And then we will tap 3 mana. And we'll play the Avatar of Discord. This is a 5/3 avatar with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you discard 2 cards. Discard 2 cards. And then our Rakdos Pit Dragon has double strike, and we will attack Simic with the Rakdos Pit Dragon. We will put the Coiling Oracle in front of it. The Coiling Oracle will die to the first strike, and Rakdos will pass the turn. Gruul untaps. Gruul draws, gets a Clan Guildmage. Gruul will play a forest. Gruul will attack. Gruul will spend 6 mana and cast Flames of the Raised Boar. This is an instant. It deals 4 damage to a target creature an opponent controls. Then it deals 2 damage to each other creature that player controls. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, it will deal 4 damage to the Avatar of Discord. The Avatar dies. The Pit Dragon takes 2, but that doesn't matter. And then Gruul will attack Rakdos with the Thunder Shaman. Rakdos can't block. They'll take 5 and go to 8. The Thunder Shaman will blow up the Signet. Signet goes away. Then Gruul will pass the turn. Azorius untaps. Azorius draws. Gets an Azorius Justicar. We'll play an island. And then we'll spend 4 mana to play the Azorius Justicar. This is a 2/2 human wizard, and when it enters the battlefield, detain up to 2 target creatures your opponents control. We'll detain the Thunder Shaman, and we'll detain the Dragon. They are detained. Then we'll attack Orzhov with the Judge's Familiar for 1. Orzhov finds at an acceptable price. Then Azorius will pass the turn. Simic will draw. Simic gets a Coiling Oracle. Simic will play an island. Simic will tap a forest and an island, and will also tap a Simic Growth Chamber to trigger the Elf Wizard's ability, and will play the Coiling Oracle. It enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter, which triggers the Gyre Sage to get a +1/+1 counter, and then we will reveal the top card. It is a Skitter Eel. It will go into our hand, and then Simic will pass the turn. Orzhov untaps. Orzhov draws. Gets an Imperious Oligarch. Orzhov will play the Plains. Orzhov will attack Rakdos with the Ghost Council of Orzhova and the Guildmage and the Martyred Rusalka for 6. Rakdos is helpless, will take 6 and go to 2. Orzhov will then tap for 6 and play the Pontiff of Blight. This is a 2/7 zombie cleric with Extort, and other creatures you control have Extort. Rakdos untaps. The Pit Dragon is detained. Rakdos draws. We get a Rakdos Guildmage. We'll go ahead and play the Guildmage. It is a 2/2 zombie shaman, and you can pay 3 and a black and discard a card to give a target creature -2/-2 until end of turn, 3 and a red to create a 2/1 red zombie creature token with haste, and it exiles at the beginning of the next end step. And then Rakdos will pass the turn. Gruul untaps. Gruul draws, gets a mountain. Gruul will pay 2 and play the Clan Guildmage. This is a 2/2 human shaman for 1 and a red. You can tap it, and target creature can't block this turn. For 2 and a green, target land you control becomes a 4/4 elemental creature with haste until end of turn. It's still a land. And we have Riot. We'll give the Guildmage a +1/+1 counter, and Gruul will then play the Gruul Turf. It'll enter the battlefield tap, will bounce the forest back into our hand, and then Gruul will pass the turn. Azorius untaps. Azorius draws, gets a Hover Barrier. Azorius will attack Orzhov with Esprit the Inscrutable and the Judge's Familiar for 4. Orzhov takes 4 and goes to 16. Isperia will call out Swamp. Orzhov has no swamps. And then Azorius now knows Orzhov's hand. And then Azorius will tap 3 islands and will play the Hover Barrier. It's a 0/6 illusion wall with Defender and Flying. And Azorius will pass the turn. Simic untaps. Simic draws. Gets a Simic Signet. Simic will spend 2 to play the Simic Signet. It's an artifact. You can pay 1, tap it, and add green and blue. Then we'll tap these 3 and tap the Signet. 4 mana, and we'll play the Skitter Eel. This is a 3/3 fish crab. When it enters the battlefield, we'll evolve the Gyre Sage. And then we will play the Simic Growth Chamber. We'll bounce the island back into our hand. And then Simic will pass the turn. Orzhov untaps. Orzhov draws. Gets a Orzhov Basilica. We'll tap the plains to tap the Signet to play the Imperious Oligarch. This is a 2/1 human cleric with vigilance. And then as we're casting, we're going to extort 4 times to give us 4 life, and each opponent will lose 4 life. This will take us all the way up to 20. Rakdos dies. Gruul goes to 14. Cinder Vines would have done 1 damage to Simic when they played their Signet, so they'll go down to 16. Azorius will go to 13. Simic will go to 14. Simic will go to 12. And Orzhov will pass the turn. Gruul untaps. Gruul draws. Gets a mountain. We'll play a mountain. The Thunder Shaman is now available. We can't really crack through any of this. Gruul will tap 6 mana and play the Skargan Firebird. This is a 3/3 Phoenix with Bloodthirst 3. The Bloodthirst part does not matter. And it has flying, and you can pay red, red, red to return it from the graveyard to our hand. We can only activate that if the opponent was dealt damage this turn. It has Riot, and we will put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then we'll pass. Azorius untaps. Azorius draws, gets an Azorius Guildgate. Azorius will attack Orzhov with Esperia and Judge's Familiar. Orzhov can't block and will take 4 damage to go back down to 16. Esperia will call out Pillory of the Sleepless, and that is correct because we saw the hand before. We'll search out a card with flying. We'll pick Esperia Supreme Judge and put that in our hand. And we'll shuffle. We'll play the Guildgate tapped, and then we'll tap out 6 mana and play Esperia Supreme Judge. This is a 6/4 legendary Sphinx and it has flying, and whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, you may draw a card. And Azorius will pass the turn. Simic untaps. Simic draws, gets an Omniban, and then Simic will play an island. And Simic will tap out for 9 mana and play a Nimbus Swimmer with 7 for X. It's a 0/0 Leviathan with flying, and it enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. In our case, that's going to be 7. We'll have tapped the Gyre Sage for that, so it's actually going to be 9, and that'll increase the Gyre Sage by 1. And then we are going to hold. Orzhov untaps. Orzhov draws, gets a Ministrant of Obligation. Orzhov will tap 3 and cast Pillory of the Sleepless, targeting Esperia. This has Enchant Creature. Enchanted creature can't attack or block. Enchanted creature has, at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life. And as we cast it, we will tap 3 mana and then extort 3 times. So we will gain 3 life to go back up to 19. And the other decks will all lose 3 life. Gruul goes to 11. Azorius goes to 10. Simic goes to 9. Then Azorius will play the Orzhov Basilica, picking up the plains. Gruul will untap. Gruul will draw, picking up a Zertar Goblin. Gruul will tap 2 and will play the Zertar Goblin. It is a 2/2 Goblin Berserker with Riot. It has double Riot. And we'll put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And then we will attack Orzhov with the Skargan Firebird in the air. Orzhov can't block. We'll take 4 and go down to 15. Then Gruul will pass the turn. Azorius untaps. Azorius loses 1 life because of the Pillory to go to 9. Azorius draws, gets a plains. Azorius will attack Orzhov again with the Familiar and Isperia. Orzhov can't block. We'll go to 11. Azorius will call out the Vindictive Vampire, and we know it's already there because we've checked. We'll grab Archon of the Triumvirate and put it into our hand. We'll shuffle. We'll play our planes. We'll tap out and play Archon of the Triumvirate. It is a 4/5 Archon with flying. Whenever Archon of the Triumvirate attacks, detain up to 2 target non-land permanents your opponents control. Azorius will pass turn. Simic untaps. Simic draws, gets a Vine Lasher Kudzu. Simic will go to combat and will attack Orzhov with the Nimbus Swimmer for 9. Orzhov will take 9 and go to 2. We'll tap 2 mana and play the Vine Lasher Kudzu. This is a 1/1 plant. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, put a counter on it. And then Simic will pass the turn. Orzhov untaps. Orzhov draws, gets a stab wound. Orzhov will play the plains. We'll play for 3 mana the stab wound, targeting the Nimbus Swimmer. It's an aura. Enchanted creature has -2/-2, and its controller loses 2 life at the beginning of each turn. And then we'll spend 4 of this 5 mana to play a Keening Banshee. This is a 2/2 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield, target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. In response to the casting of the Keening Banshee, Simic will tap and play the Frilled Mystic. It's a 3/2 Elf Lizard Wizard with flash, and when it enters the battlefield, we can counter a target spell. The Keening Banshee is countered. With the remaining floating mana, we will extort to go up to 3, and everybody will lose 1 life. Gruul goes down to 10. Azorius goes down to 8. Simic goes down to 8. Keening Banshee goes to the graveyard, and Orzhov will pass the turn. Gruul untaps. Gruul draws, gets a forest. We'll play a mountain. Azorius untaps. Azorius loses 1 life because of the pillory to go to 7. Azorius draws, gets a Render Silent. And then Azorius will spend 5 mana and play Lavinia of the 10th. She is a 4/4 legendary human soldier with protection from red. When she enters the battlefield, detain each non-land permanent your opponent's control with converted mana cost 4 or less. This will detain everything Simic has. It'll detain everything Orzhov has except for the Pontiff of Blight, and will detain everything Gruul has except for Skargan Firebird. Then we will attack Orzhov with the Isperia. We'll attack Simic with the Archon of the Triumvirate. We'll attack Gruul with the Judge's Familiar, and we'll use the Archon's ability to make it so that the Skargan Firebird is also detained. That means that everything is detained. And we will attack Gruul with the Azorius Justicar. So Gruul will be getting these 2. Orzhov will be getting Isperia, and Simic will be getting Archon. In response to the detain trigger, we will tap the Zamek Guildmage and tap 2 mana to remove a counter from the Coiling Oracle to draw a card. We drew an Applied Biomancy, and then we will tap the Gyre Sage as well in response, and we will cast Applied Biomancy. It says return target creature to its owner's hand. We'll target the Archon of the Triumvirate. Archon flies back into Azorius' hand. Gruul is completely detained, and so they'll take 3 from the Justicar and the Familiar to go down to 7. Cindervines will hit Simic for 1 to go to 7. Then Orzhov will kick the bucket from being hit, and they'll die. Azorius will call out Vindictive Vampire before they do. Azorius sees the truth and will grab a Sphinx of Foresight and we'll put it into our hand. We'll shuffle. Also falling off are the Pillory of the Sleepless and the Stab Wound, because Orzhov is dead. And now it's Simic's turn. Simic will untap, but everything is detained now, so we can't use any other permanents we currently have. We'll draw. We get an island. We'll play the island. This will put a counter on the Vine Lasher Kudzu. And then we will tap 5. And we'll play the Galloping Lizrog. It's a 3/3 frog lizard with trample. When it enters the battlefield, you may remove any number of +1/+1 counters from among creatures you control. If you do, put twice that many counters on Galloping Lizrog. We'll go ahead and remove these 4 counters. and we'll put 8 counters on the Galloping Lizrog, making it an 11/11. And then we'll tap 4 more mana and play the Omniband. This is a 3/3 frog, and you can tap it to make a target creature a frog with base power and toughness 3/3 until end of turn. Everything is still detained. This will put a counter on the Gyre Sage, and Simic will pass the turn. Gruul can't do much. Gruul will draw. They'll play a Gruul Turf, picking up a forest, and continue their flood streak. We'll go to Azorius' turn. They'll untap. They'll draw. They get a Plains. They'll play the Plains. They'll tap 7. And they'll play the Archon again. And then Azorius will pass the turn. Simic untaps. Simic draws. Gets an island. We'll play the island. We'll tap Azorius with the Galloping Lizrog. Playing the land should put a counter on the Kudzu. Azorius will chump with the Justicar. Justicar goes down. Then Simic will pass the turn. Gruul untaps. Gruul draws. Gets a Gruul Charm. We'll play a forest. And then we'll pass the turn. Azorius untaps. Azorius draws. Gets an Azorius Signet. We'll spend 3 mana. And we'll cast Unbreakable Formation. Its creatures you control gain indestructible end of turn. And we cast this during our main phase, so every creature will get a +1/+1 counter and vigilance. We'll take 1 damage from the Cinderbinds to go to 6. And then we'll attack with the Archon of the Triumvirate, and we will detain Nimbus Swimmer and the Skargan Firebird. We'll attack with Isperia Supreme Judge, also into Simic. We'll attack Gruul with Isperia and Lavinia the 10th, and we'll attack Gruul also with Judge's Familiar. Simic will die because they don't have any blockers. So we're going to go hunting for answers. We're going to tap 2 mana and remove the counter from the Vine Lasher Kudzu to draw. We get a Simic Ascendancy. That's not going to help. We're going to spend 2 more mana, tap, tap, to remove the counter from the Gyre Sage to draw again. The island will also not help us. And then we'll resign ourselves to our fate. Gruul can only block Lavinia with the Wasteland Viper, so we'll chump Lavinia and we'll take 6 to go to 1 while Simic dies and the Wasteland Viper dies. Simic perishes. For hitting Gruul, we'll call out a mountain and then we'll take a look at their hand. They have no mountains, and so we don't get the free draw. And then Azorius will tap 4 more mana and play Sphinx of Foresight. This is a 4/4 Sphinx, and you may reveal this card from your opening hand. If you do scry 3 at the beginning of your first upkeep, it has flying at the beginning of your turn, scry 1, and then Azorius will pass the turn. Gruul draws, gets a Zarta Druid. Gruul will play the Zarta Druid. It's a 1/1 human druid. You can tap to add green, and whenever you tap Zarta Druid for mana, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. We don't have much that we can do here, so we will pass the turn. Azorius untaps. We'll scry 1 at the beginning of the turn. We take the Judge's Familiar and stick it on the bottom. We'll draw. We get the Plains, not something we care about. We'll play the Plains just because. And then we'll go to combat, and we will attack Gruul with the Lavinia, Isperia, Archon of the Triumvirate, locking down the Skargan, Hellkite, and the Shaman, as well as the Judge's Familiar and the Sphinx of Foresight. Gruul can't block that. We'll take a giant pile of damage and die. And that is the end of the battle between the Ravnica Allegiance guild kits. Let me know what your thoughts were about this game in the comments below. I will accept your constructive criticism to help me become better at producing these videos. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of these videos, you can hit subscribe. This was Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.